But let's step back for a moment and think about a big organization. Now, if there is a big organization, and I'm sure it happens in your case, in Verizon, right? So there will be not a few projects, there will be hundreds of projects that will happen over there. And if each group or each project manager is left on their own to handle these projects, can you imagine how much we're losing in terms of what they can gain if they are looked at together? The synergy that we can bring in from all these projects. Now, this is exactly the role of the project management office. Project management office really sits on top above all the projects, and they look at how the effort of different projects that are run in the organization is synergized. Now, project management office is also called PMO. A lot of times you'll hear in terms of PMO. So primarily, two big roles for project management office is to facilitate sharing of resources, methodologies, tools, and techniques, so that many of these things are not reinvented, don't need to be reinvented by each of the projects. And they can always, because of the project management office, because they are the centralized office who takes care of all these, a project when it starts can hit the ground running. So essentially, what we're saying is one of the responsibility, the way we look at PMO or project management office is that they facilitate sharing of resources across these projects, methodologies and tools and techniques. And they standardize projects related governance processes. So there are processes, they'll standardize, and they'll ask each of the project to follow these processes. Now, in the real life, what really happens is there will be standards, and at times there might be some projects that will take an exception, but only through that exception route. And that will again be studied by the PMO, a project management office, to see if that exception is in some way can be looked at in new standard. Now, there are different PMO structures. Now, because again, organizations are different, each organization is different, and there can be different PMO structures. Now, before that, so there are different types of PMO structures. Let's look at what are the different types. Broadly, there are three types. This is the first type of PMO structure. It's called directive. Directive PMO structures, they essentially directly manage, and they have very high control on the projects that happens. It's almost that these project managers are directly reporting to them. So, because they have direct control on how the project is moving. So this is the kind of structure which is a directive PMO structure. The next kind is what is called as controlling. Now, they'll not directly manage the projects. They'll not directly manage the project, but they'll put together some processes, and they'll kind of, not directly, through compliance, adherence to compliance, they would expect projects to follow these processes. So it is more like it's moderate control they have, because they expect projects to follow these processes, and they'll probably do audit, and if a project doesn't adhere to that, they'll report that. So in that sense, they have some control. They have control, though they don't directly manage those projects, as in the case of directive. The next, third type of PMO structure is called supportive. This kind of PMO or project management office, they play more a consultative role. In other words, when a project is started, they'll connect to the project manager, connect with the project manager, and they'll say, hey, we are there for you, and this is what we provide. This is the kind of, this is how we can help you, and let's work together. And as a project manager, you'll reach out to them whenever you need any kind of help in terms of processes, to understand the processes, to have your members coached on the processes that needs to be done, and so on. So they play a supportive role. So if you see this between these three types of project management structure, PMO structures, directive, controlling, and supportive, the control level goes down as we go from directive to controlling to supportive. In other words, directive type of PMO structure has the maximum control on the project, then comes controlling, and then comes supportive. Now, PMO functions, we talked about the project management function. Let's look at all the different functions that they play in running when a project is run. One is they manage shared resources, because they have the overview of what resources are being deployed in which project. So they know, for example, which resource will get freed from which project. So if you need some resource, and they'll be able to tell you, hey, okay, on this date, you will get this resource from that project, and so on. So and sometimes, these resources might be shared. They know that this particular resource is not in that project or in this function, but they are not being used. His skills or her expertise is not being used full time, and you can probably share that resource. Now, then another function of PMO is identifying and developing best practices, because best practices is something that evolves from experiences of different projects. As the organization moves forward, as things change, and they'll keep a record of those, and they'll keep on developing those. And so when a new project comes, they'll come and say, okay, these are the best practices in different areas. For example, when you are doing a scheduling, you might want to look at these best practices, right? I mean, you might don't try to crash. We'll use these terms, in scheduling, and or try to minimize the schedule too much. Ensure that you have put enough resources for quality, and so on and so forth. So they'll they'll maintain the best practices, they'll share these best practices with each of the project. Then they'll also provide function for coaching, mentoring, oversight. Typically, what they'll do is, for example, if you run a project, you will have different resources, right? Now, of course, when you get your resources, the project manager, you will ensure that each of them have the technical expertise that is required. But at the same time, in terms of processes, many of the resources that you will get might not have an understanding of what are the processes that are being followed in the organization, or how they should follow the process in order to support you in running a good project. So PMO function, PMO will come and probably train how the process should be followed and what are the pitfalls, and so on and so forth. Then PMO will also monitor compliance. If a project is complying to the processes, are they following the best practices, and so on and so forth. or the quality processes? Are they using the processes or going through the processes that will give them the best quality, and so on and so forth? So they'll do some kind of monitoring activities also. They are also involved, PMO can also be involved in developing and managing policies and procedures, right? And because again, policies and procedures, they constantly evolve from experience from each of the project, as well as from changes that happens, new understanding that comes from research outside, and what happens in the market. PMO will also be involved in coordinating communication, ensuring that you as a project manager are communicating adequately with all the stakeholders, and if there is any gap, some stakeholders are not being communicated, they know that this kind of lack of communication can create a whole lot of problem later on, and so they'll come and help you to chart out what kind of communication that needs to be done. So that was a very brief on the project management office. Again, I'll repeat that it is not that all organizations have project management office, but if you go into an organization and you are a project manager, you need to look out for if there is a project management office over there in that organization, what kind of functions that they play and what kind of structure that they have, so then you can tune your project based on how you can get maximum leverage from the project management office.